Welcome everyone. I'm so glad you're here this evening. My name is Ann Russo, and I'm a professor in Women's and Gender Studies and the director of the Women's Center here at DePaul University. We're here this evening for Dr. Ada Cheng's performance and talkback, Loving Myself Within 1,000 Cuts. Please note that the event is being recorded and may be shared on the Women's Center YouTube. If you have comments or questions, please send them to me, Ann Russo, through the chat, or Leila Farah through the chat. Before beginning, I just want to thank all of the co-sponsors of this event: American Studies, the Center for Community Health Equity, the Center for Black Diaspora, the Healing Justice Dialogue Series, Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies, Global Asian Studies, and Women's and Gender Studies. I'd also like to thank the students in the Women's Center who helped with the publicity and other logistics. So thank you to Keish Lozano, Rena Shenoy, Anna Mulk, Aviv Goldman. For more information about the Women's Center, I'll put up a link in a little bit to our weekly newsletter. So I want to welcome Dr. Ada Cheng. Ada, it is wonderful to have you back this evening. If you all want to do a cheers for Dr. Ada Cheng. Dr. Ada Cheng is a storyteller, a solo performer, a show producer, educator, facilitator, and speaker, and she's based here in Chicago. I met her in 2001 when she joined DePaul as a professor in sociology. Over her 15 years at DePaul, I dearly loved being in community with her. Ada brought so much as a professor in sociology, as a vibrant and contributing member of our WGS program and department, a very beloved teacher, an excellent scholar, and an active community member. We continue to miss you, Ada, and we're always glad for you to return and share your storytelling, your knowledge, your expertise, and performance. I remember meeting up with Ada in 2016 when she told me she was leaving DePaul to become a performer, storyteller, stand-up comedian, artist. Okay, so when she told me this, I just felt such a deep loss, you know, and it was coupled with deep admiration for, you know, making that decision, deep admiration, maybe, you know, even a little jealousy. And also I had a little concern for leaving, you know, a full-time position, tenured position. And yet I knew, having witnessed her determination, her amazing creativity, her humor, her storytelling, her truth-telling, her resilience, that she was going to contribute to social consciousness and change in ways that she felt unable to at the university. So I'm going to mention a few of her many, many accomplishments. Dr. Cheng has had two solo performances, Not Quite, Asian American by Law, Asian Woman by Desire, and Broken Hearts, Loving Across Borders. Both very powerful shows holding complex truths and realities that really make us deepen our understanding as well as our hearts. She's performed in a whole array of venues across the country. In 2020, with the Collaborative Action Theater Company, which you should look up, very cool, produced her first short film, A Letter to My Younger Self, an emotionally powerful piece concerning anti-Asian racism. Ada is a community builder. She's created so many platforms and spaces for people from many different communities to tell their own stories, to share their struggles, their vulnerabilities, and their beauty. She's host to 5 storytelling shows, including Pour One Out, a monthly storytelling series, Am I Man Enough? Stories of Toxic Masculinity, Talk Stories, an Asian American, Asian diaspora storytelling show, Speaking Truth series, and This is America, Truths Through My Body. There's so much more to say about Dr. Ada Cheng and all the areas of her work and contributions, the awards, but I'm going to turn it over to her. So please check out her website. I'll put that up in a second. Again, please direct your comments to me, Ann Russo, or to Leila Farah, comments and questions, because we'll be the ones who will be giving them to Ada after the presentation. So could you all please welcome Ada Cheng? And if you could show in all the ways that you can, that you're welcoming her into the space. So welcome, Ada.
Oh, thank you so much. Emoji. Oh, I started crying even before the performance started. That's just who I am. I always do that. I always started crying. And I just want to mention that's a virtual background. Nobody is paying me that well to have such beautiful place. I'm still struggling, trying to make a living. So I am, I'm doing well, right, in terms of my artistic career, but I'm still trying to, have some stability. I know Valerie and I, we just had this conversation about how to balance integrity, passion, and also, artistic desire, but also stability, right? Financial stability. And those are the things that we confront. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to take you on a journey. I know within academia, we're so used to using our intellect, right? I don't want you to think, not yet, right? I want you to go on a journey with me and start with your heart, use your heart. And I want you to think about this as a solo performance. And I'm going to read 4 pieces that lay out what we're witnessing in terms of the anti-Asian racism, but also weaving it with gender-based violence and microaggression. And then afterwards, we're going to have a conversation. And so feel free if you want to, ask questions and make comments and send it to Anna later. But we're going to have a conversation afterwards. And so the first piece I'm going to share is called Dear White Woman. And this piece was written in late 2019. Dear white woman, I regretted saying nothing to you. So I'm writing this letter. It was a good day, that first Friday in October 2019, sunny and cool. It was around 2 p.m. I just finished presenting my gender-based violence workshop at the medical school at UIC. I had started this new job with the university in July 2019. And this workshop was the first major one I had to conduct with this new position. I was happy because I thought everything went well, so well that the student organizers told me that they wanted me back in spring. I was feeling proud, standing in front of the medical school building entrance on Polk Street. When I ordered a lift to return to my office, you were right there dropping off someone. I was elated that I didn't have to wait long. The day is really going my way, I thought to myself. I got into a car and said, thank you so much. How are you? My standard greeting to a Lyft driver. You glanced at me through the mirror and said, I'm good. Where are you from? Just like that. We're sitting inches from each other, yet the chasm between us suddenly feels like 1,000 miles. I paused. Where are you from is one of my most dreaded questions. I was asked so very often before becoming a citizen in 2015. It was simple when I first arrived in this country from Taiwan as an international student back in 1991. I was foreign, after all, with my stronger accent then and wearing clothing I brought from home. Yet with each passing year or decade, this question has become more complicated and layered. I can no longer answer it with ease. That question was posed to me even after I became a citizen in May 2015. That same afternoon after the naturalization ceremony, and the days and the weeks, the month and the years afterwards, that question never stopped. Why would I have expected anything different? That certificate of naturalization, that piece of paper certifying my citizenship status, didn't change anyone's perception of me as someone from somewhere else. My status might have changed, but my face didn't. I mean, my accent wasn't that thick, so thick that you would mistake me as foreign. You had no other reference than this face of mine, the only marker of difference, just like a million other faces from Asia. And when I hesitated, you asked, originally? Like I didn't know what you were asking, like I didn't already have a script for this question, like I hadn't answered the same question over and over, like I hadn't said originally myself many times before, like my silence was my lack of understanding of your words or English. No, I was killing you softly in the backseat with my gaze filled with both sorrow and rage, calculating how much I should let your remark and therefore you shape the rest of my day or days after that. When I told you I was from Taiwan, you started talking about how your brother-in-law was working there and how he loved it. I asked you which city he was living on the island. You couldn't say. You simply went on and on about these beautiful experiences in Asia. I wanted to tell you, I don't care. I mean, do you even know the difference between Taiwan and Thailand? Because many Americans can't even distinguish these two countries since the first part for these two words sound exactly the same. I wanted to lecture you about profiling though, a softer type of profiling, the type of profiling that doesn't kill us, but it marks us as different. It tells us that we don't belong. It is a form of racial profiling masked as cultural curiosity, often loved by both liberals and conservatives alike, pretending to be cosmopolitan. Yet culture is no substitute for race. You might ask, does it mean I can't ask this question at all? Of course, it is not that you can't ask it. It is how and when you ask the question. It is the context within which you ask it. Context is everything. Ask yourself, is this how you greet every human being you come across on your drive, in the party, on the street? Or do you direct this phrase only to people with certain facial features deemed as foreign and alien, or shall we say, exotic? There are millions of people with facial features similar to mine who were born in the United States. This is the place they call home. They're not from somewhere else. They have always been here. By asking them that question, you're telling them that they don't fit the image of what an American should be. Where are you from? Marks someone as an outsider, outside of a norm and a standard against which you used to judge them. I'm the other, against the white faces you count as American. Whether I was indeed born somewhere else is beside the point. I might be a citizen on paper, but it is still a long way to belong and to call this country home, even after 3 decades. Let me tell you a story. I once performed my solo Not Quite at Des Moines, Iowa. During the talkback, a middle-aged white woman vehemently disputed my comment about the racial implications of this phrase. She insisted that she could not be racist since her husband sitting right next to her was a Chinese man from Hong Kong. It was as if her physical proximity to a person of color could excuse or exonerate her of any bias or prejudice. She said that she was simply curious about other cultures. Insisting on her good intentions, she wouldn't stop arguing until another white audience asked her to ponder this question: who is in the rightful place to define racism? I believe you, if you say you were simply trying to be friendly, except benevolent intentions don't always matter, especially when they lead to harmful impact. Not on you, but on me. It should have been a great day for me. Instead, I spent the 7-minute ride debating if I should get out of the car, if saving $5 was worth my dignity, if I should educate you as opposed to simply enjoying my existence, if I should trade dignity for convenience, if I should stay quiet while struggling with my own conscience and doubting if I did the right thing with my silence. All the energy that should have been reserved for my joy that day was wasted on you while you were so oblivious to everything. I used to intervene until my energy was completely drained, until I no longer had joy in life. And then I realized this: not every fight should be my fight. I have to pick my battle just to preserve some sanity so I can thrive, not just survive. So I sat in the back seat and decided that I would write you a letter entitled, "Dear White Woman." I consider this piece your compensation for my short ride with you. Best, if not the best, Ada. So this is the first piece entitled "Dear White Woman." And you will see the different issues that come up, and we can have a conversation afterwards. The second piece I'm going to share took place in February 2020. At the time, I work at UIC, Women's Leadership and Resource Center, and my role was to conduct workshops and education, programming and outreach on gender-based violence. This email came from an Asian American student. Most likely the student didn't know where to go with this particular message, so it landed on my desk. So this piece is a series of exchanges between myself and the student. And I want you to think back, February 2020, and I didn't rewrite. This piece was written in the middle of 2020, and I didn't rewrite it. And I want to show that I didn't need to wait for a whole year of witnessing the intensification of anti-Asian racism to foresee what was to come until this year. Dear university staff, hello. I want to report an insulting incident that happened to us today. My friends and I were at this building trying to grab some coffee. We were waiting in line, and finally, when it was our turn to order, we stepped forward. During that short time, we heard an absurd racist joke that people at the cashier made, saying, watch out for the coronavirus. As everyone knows, the coronavirus is a global issue that has taken away more than 500 innocent lives. Treating us as that virus is both humiliating and insulting to the people who are suffering and fighting for that contagious disease. It is very unfortunate that this occurred during the Black History Month, the month that we believe that no one should be discriminated based on the color of their skin. I hope you examine this issue. We sincerely want an apology for this inconvenience. Sincerely, student. Dear student, thank you for the message. I'm very sorry that this happened to you. I would like to meet in person to discuss the situation further. Let me know when you can stop by. Ada. Dear Ada, thank you for your kindness. We were all furious about the incident. However, after knowing that there are people who care for minorities like us, it gives us pride knowing that we chose to come to the school. Again, thank you for offering us the option to deal with this matter. But we have decided not to make a scene. Student. Dear student, I don't think you will ever read this message. I do hope that at some point you will tell the story on your own. I haven't been able to sleep for days since I received your email. That last sentence, we have decided not to make a scene, hit me hard. That sentence has filled me with sadness. It feels like someone has driven a knife into my heart. I'm not going to die from it, but my heart aches and bleeds with each gentle cut and push. Your message was the first complaint I received, but it was not the first one I have heard. Since the outbreak of the coronavirus, we have seen an increase of hatred towards Chinese people, people of Asian descent, or Asian Americans in general. Physical assaults have taken place, racial slurs hurled, suspicious looks cast, masks put on specifically when Asian people are present. Otherwise, socially conscious people making jokes and references about the virus and Chinese people. Businesses in Chinatown plummeted due to misinformation, xenophobia, and racism. In a world where racism is oftentimes seen between Black and white, discrimination, prejudice, racism, and xenophobia toward and against Asians are often taken for granted and normalized, that even UC at Berkeley briefly posted something online along the line. Xenophobia is a normal response after the outbreak. Our own president insisted on calling the virus Chinese or Wuhan, knowing fully well that the pandemic will bring out pre-existing hatred, xenophobic sentiments, and racist assaults against people of Asian descent. Different universities sent warning emails to students about the virus, yet very few made public statements denouncing anti-Asian racism. We don't label any germ, disease, and illness or virus white when they wiped out Native American tribes. Why do we label Corona Asian? This pandemic shows how easily we as Asian Americans can go from being model minority to yellow peril in this country within seconds. But what I want to say here is not about the virus. It is about that last sentence of yours. We have decided not to make a scene. I truly see you because you remind me of my younger self. When I used to believe that people would understand where I was coming from and empathize with my position if I were polite enough, respectful enough, articulate enough, or liked enough. And then it dawned on me one day, my degree of politeness, respectfulness, or likability has little to do with whether people can grasp the complexity of issue. For many, they understood them all along. In our culture, I was taught since I was young to be quiet, to not speak up, to not challenge authority, and to keep peace and maintain harmony. I had to work very hard to develop my own voice and to have one. When I was younger, I tried hard to balance between having a voice and wanting to be liked, having ideas and opinionated and being seen too opinionated and loud, and telling people what I really thought and how I really felt, and not wanting to alienate anyone with my truth. I still struggle with it. And I'm in my 50s. But here's the reality. There's no balance. It is a lose-lose situation. For me, as a woman, I do have the benefit of racial perception. I am hardly seen as a militant or progressive or aggressive as an Asian woman, even when I am, compared to a Black woman who can easily be seen as aggressive or militant, aggressive, even when she's simply being assertive. My body, as much as it may be sexually objectified, exoticized, or violated, is not seen as threatening, thus allowing me to freely navigate the world without anyone calling the police on me. And we know the ways our bodies are perceived can have life and death consequences. But the worst part is this: when you don't practice speaking up for yourself, you end up losing the only voice you have, your own. I want you to remember this. Silence can be a strength, but it isn't always a virtue. Being quiet doesn't always get you the peace. Being polite doesn't always keep you out of trouble. Being respectful doesn't always get you the respect in return. Please learn to tell your own stories, as I can always tell stories for others. Learn to shout on top of your lungs. Make a scene. Be the troublemaker. Be the trouble for yourself and others. It's time. It's time. Ada. So this piece is entitled A Letter to My Younger Self. The third piece I'm going to share is related to gender-based violence. And it was revisit and trigger warning. I'm not going to have graphic details, but it is related to sexual assault. So, I mean, this whole, journey solo, as you can see that I get very emotional. So I want you to also take care of yourself. And this piece is revisiting sexual assault within contemporary context. And it's entitled, "Let It Not Be Your 10." It took me 10 years. In February 2020, I was invited by a faculty member from the Global Asian Studies program at UIC to do presentations for his Asian American courses. This presentation was entitled "Sexual Assault on College Campus and Asian American Experiences." This presentation was different for me for at least 2 reasons. It was the first time that I presented for college campuses with predominantly Asian American students. Staring at faces similar to mine hit me viscerally. It was also the first time that I did something very different with my materials. I started out my talk with the following major topics: the American colonization in Asia, military and political interventions in the Asian region, and the United States' racist and imperialist legacy in Asia. The constructed images of Asian women as docile, submissive, exotic, sensual, and sexually willing, and the sexual fetishization of Asian American women. The historical, symbolic, and cultural emasculation and desexualization of Asian American men. The necessity to center race in sexual assault discourse. Why is race, or why are racialized images central to our understanding of sexual assault? If you are perceived to be submissive, docile, sensual, exotic, and fetishized, is it possible that your rejections, even if they're firm, can be disregarded over and over? It's possible that if you're perceived to be sexually willing and available, your rejections, even if they're clear and persistent, can be fantasized in a twisted way to mean affirmations. Immediately after the class, a student approached me and said, "Thank you very much for the presentation. I really appreciate the way you approach this topic. You made this material relevant to my experiences." I knew what she meant. She didn't mean my presentation was relevant to her as a woman. She meant it was relevant to her as an Asian woman in this country. Her remark shook me to my core, not only in terms of how I should do training on gender-based violence in the future, but also how I had to re-examine my own sexual assault. I had to ask myself, why did I tell the story the way I did? Why did I leave out certain details? And most importantly, why was my identity as an Asian woman never given a proper place in my own public account of the story? My sexual assault took place in 2010. He was a colleague of mine in the department at a well-known university in Chicago. He was a friend, a progressive faculty, and a comrade, one who will march with women and speak up for us. Yet he sexually assaulted me despite my repeated rejections. I couldn't even name it as rape until another close colleague of mine named it for me. I couldn't reconcile his good man image in public with the violence he committed in private. I'm not sure if he was aware of the dissonance either. I have told the story in public a few times and published it in print since 2016. I left out something important. I decided not to discuss race, ethnicity in the story to mitigate the stereotyping that might ensue. My colleague is an immigrant man of color, a member of a marginalized community. I left out that detail because of the larger political climate of our time. In 2015, when Donald Trump came out running for presidency, his campaign relied on demonizing immigrants, particularly immigrant men of color, constructing them as drug dealers, traffickers, criminals, and rapists. I didn't want this to become another statistic contributing to the portrayal of immigrant men of color as the villain in our larger cultural and political landscapes. Since I didn't name his race, I didn't explore how my own race might have played a part in my own victimization. I have been troubled by my own admission, since my racial identity as an Asian woman has been central in my existence as an immigrant woman of color in this country, and my experiences as an immigrant woman of color faculty member in academia. In a way, my colleagues have dismissed my presence, appropriated my intellectual labor, and discounted my contribution. In a way that my students have disregarded my authority as a 10-year faculty member. And in the way I have been told to go back to my own country and consistently asked where I'm from originally, even after I became a citizen in 2015. How could race be so salient in all my experiences as an immigrant woman of color, yet so absent at this moment of intimate violation? What other pernicious effect can this erasure of race have? What I didn't say to the students in 2020 is this: is it possible that because of these images developed and constructed out of the American racist, colonialist, and imperialist legacies, you will be perceived as a complicitous collaborator in your own sexual assault, not only by others, but also by yourself? Is it possible that we have also come to see ourselves as complicit in the violence against us? I did, questioning myself in terms of the legitimacy of the rape, because there was no brute force, because it was not in the dark alley, because he was no stranger but someone I trusted, because I didn't fight back and yell, because I thought I was trying to salvage a friendship, and because I stayed quiet and let it go afterwards, pretending nothing had happened. Exactly the same way I deal with anti-Asian racism early on in my life in this country. On March 16, in 2021, a white man murdered 8 people in Atlanta, among them 6 Asian women. In the press conference, The sheriff minimized the violence against these Asian women by labeling it as the shooter's trouble with sexual addictions. Within 1 month of my arrival in this country in 1991, I learned a particular form of racial profiling unique to me as an Asian woman via this phrase: I like Asian women. I like Asian women. This phrase has been said to me millions of times throughout decades by men of all races, particularly white men. The key word here is Asian, not women. Men are looking for a particular set of titillating images and stereotypes in me. I'm not important. The collective we that they have been fantasizing is what satisfies their sexual desire. I'm never just a woman. I have always been an Asian woman. In an effort to protect my perpetrator, I never once asked how my own identity as an Asian woman, as well as the image based on the racist misogyny in his fantasies, might have played a role in his repeated refusals to accept my rejections. I obscured the fact that I had consistently experienced racialized misogyny and sexism from men of color. And even until this day, I still do not know how to address harm done to one another within marginalized communities. I wrote myself, the inseparable Asian woman, out of my own narratives and blended myself within the abstract category of the woman. When you write yourself out of your own stories, there's no story to tell about you or for you. It took me 10 years. Better not be your 10. Thank you. So that was the piece written in 2021. The last piece I'm going to share is called Not Your Typical Asian Woman. Do you express love or appreciation for this country? I was debating about attending your performance, but I didn't know if it would be a waste of my time. On the morning of May 5th this year, I received this message through my website about my solo performance, not quite, at Ella Johnson Library that evening. My website was not listed on the public announcement for the event. For him, if it were him, to message me, he would have had to Google me, filled out a form, left his name, his email, and his telephone number, not required. He went through all this trouble, even though he could have simply done one thing. Just don't show. But he wanted me to know his thoughts and feelings, his presence. He didn't swear, nor did he utter any words explicitly derogatory. He started his message with a question mark, as if he were waiting for my responses. This is a type of communication I have experienced as an Asian female academic. No one has said anything so derogatory that they would be forced to face any severe consequences less easily swept aside under the rug as interpersonal conflicts by others, as well as by the institution. Yet everything said is meant to discredit, delegitimate, unsettle, and upset. Let's not easily set aside by me. I talk back nonetheless. Before I received tenure in my department here, a white male senior faculty member was particularly blatant in that regard, couching everything demeaning in abstract, objective academic language. Once I told him I had a paper to be published in a leading journal of my field as a leading article. Instead of congratulating me, he immediately commented that the journal that I was going to publish was methodologically unsound and theoretically weak. This came from someone who stopped publishing decades ago. I had to gently remind him that sociology has changed a lot since he first or last published, that BIPOC and LGBTQIA scholars has produced an enormous amount of scholarships to challenge the discipline, and that feminist sociology had established itself as a prestigious and credible field. I talked back. Once, I was paired with him to review each other's syllabus. The syllabus I submitted for review was immigrant experiences. During our meeting, he told me that he had problems with the first segment of my course entitled The Racialization of US Immigration History. He proceeded to tell me that immigration history in this country had nothing to do with race. It really didn't matter that I included all the seminal work by scholars of color and immigrant scholars as part of the reading. It dawned on me then, this was someone who used every opportunity to counteract my perspectives, which were always seen as partial and particular and thus not representative of all. Deep down, he didn't believe that people like me deserved a place in academia, and he would remind me of my unworthy presence every chance he had. I talked back by reporting him to the chair, and the truth is, he had no fear because there was nothing I could do to him. I started documenting every incident of microaggression in the department. I had to. It only takes one person to put you in a defensive mode where you feel that everyone is waiting for you to fail. It's never just one person. There are always several others lurking behind smiling faces, witnessing problematic practices to continue in silence while believing themselves to be allies and comrades because they haven't committed any personal harm. I had to remind them, not talking back is a form of harm. Silence is complicity. One final straw with this white female senior faculty member. This was someone that I considered as an ally until I pushed the conversation toward the redistribution of resources and power and privileges. During our last meeting together, I spent an hour and a half talking about institutional racism, providing her with examples and anecdotes of personal experiences. At the end of the meeting, she said, "Ada, I just disagree with you." At that moment, I realized that it was futile to have any further discussions. I just disagree with you really meant I do not recognize your reality. That night, she emailed everyone in the department wanting statistics and numbers to demonstrate institutionalized racism. My personal experiences were not data, but abstract and objective numbers were. That was the final straw I needed to get out of the institution. I resigned from the department soon afterwards. I realized I could no longer invest my energy and talent in an institution that didn't recognize and acknowledge my existence. I also had to examine my own complicity in enabling the system. Leaving with my 2 feet was the exact top act I had to do. I'm not trying to be the hero here. I'm not asking for a politics of purity. That's impossible. However, over and over, I keep having to confront the role that we, including members of the marginalized communities, the role that we play in the institution we're in. As we gradually climb up the institutional ladder, are we here to rock the boat? Or do we act in such a way to ensure our continual invitation back to the room? People often ask me, do you regret leaving academia? Now, I'm living my best life as an artist and as an independent scholar. Have I paid a price? Absolutely. Living my best life doesn't mean everything is perfect. Life is a trade-off. How we make our choices demonstrates our integrity. I answer to my own conscience at the end of the day, because that is more of a torment than anything. I'm still talking back out loud. Thank you. So this is the end of the solo performance, tackling various issues, microaggression, gender-based violence, and anti-Asian racism. So this is what I usually do. After my performance, I usually have a talk back for people to ask questions or any comments that they want to make. So, Anne, do you feel comfortable? Can people raise their hands and for you to unmute them? Would that be okay? Or how would you like to handle it? Oh, you have to unmute.
You're muted, sweetie. You're still muted, Anne.
And you're still muted.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, I was gonna say, I'm opening up the chat and I think, should we try letting people unmute themselves?
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
As long as you feel comfortable, I want to make sure that you actually feel comfortable.
Yeah, we had some concerns, but I think we're okay right now. So if people want to offer questions in the chat, or you can now unmute yourselves, maybe put your hand up if you want to say something, so that, because there's a lot of people here, if you put your hand up, it'll be easier for Ada to see you. Does that make sense, Ada?
Yes. Why don't anyone want to kind of talk what stays with you, what touches you, what resonates with you, and feel free to simply raise your hand, and then and Anne or myself can unmute you. Or let's start with how you feel. Just feeling, don't worry about thinking. Yes, Valerie.
Yes, all of those pieces really touched me, Ada, because, you know, certainly as BIPOC, I feel many of the same challenges that you do. But one in particular regards, sometimes I struggle with this notion that I deserve a life that isn't burdened by talking back, talking out. I mean, you know, that can kill you. I recently read a book entitled And the Body Keeps the Score. Right? There is a tremendous physical and emotional cost to speaking out. Can you tell us, number one, what are, I mean, hasn't it been an emotional and physical challenge for you to do that? And also, is it appropriate if a person just wants to just say, you know what, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to, you know, just like the student, you know, in the story, I don't want to say, I just want to just be at peace and just live my life without the burden of having to be Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman or any of our Shiros.
Very good question. Let me ask you, how many of you kind of cried during my performance? If you can kind of put a sign, emoji, that you kind of shared the tears. You cried a little bit. Wow, Valerie, kind of, I don't know why this question gonna make me emotional. I support storytelling. But here's also the thing I realized. Storytelling is also a process of re-traumatization, right? For me to share a story, to get through 45, 50 minutes, right? To not break down and to still have some ability to continue this performance, sharing stories. I don't talk about it because the stories are a form of injury. Not telling them is a form of injury, but telling them is also a form of injury. And so I constantly, and I have to say, I get booked up every May. I get booked up for AAPI Heritage Month. And so I will have to retell stories. They're important because these are tools for education, raising consciousness. But I have to say, you know, there are times I really ask myself and I say to myself, I think I need to take a break. I think I need to not continue to do this. I have told myself, I think I need to recognize the trauma on me. And I'm a strong person. And so I can handle it well. But there are times I'm really struggling, right? And so it really takes tremendous strength. Lila is a performer herself, so she knows the strength and the resilience that you need to have to be on stage, get through the performance in one piece, and to be able to still present that emotions in a way that emotions don't overwhelm the audience, but also don't paralyze me on stage. And that was such a struggle for me. And you're right, Valerie. I do it because I have done this for such a long time. I know how to take care of myself, even though I also know this really aligned, like I can go off because it is traumatizing. And it is totally okay that for you to say, I need to take care of myself. I don't need to explain myself. I need to pick my fight. And sometimes I just want to live. You don't need to talk. You don't need to speak up. It is okay. Layla, and then Greta. Layla, go ahead.
Thank you, Ada, for this very powerful testimony and your genealogy and your resistance and your resilience. And yes, I know exactly this thing. And I just want to reflect back to you that I used to destroy myself doing performance. Anne Russo was actually very instrumental in helping me to stop that by reflecting that to me. But I want to agree with what Anne is saying in the chat, and that is that we need these narratives. We need these narratives, and the performative aspect allows for an entry that the written word on a page cannot do. And so we are honored to have an energetic exchange. Of course, it's different in person in the squares on the Zoom, but I just feel like your choices of which stories to tell and how to tell them, and to talk about how you couldn't tell them, so that we can understand there is a process. There's a process of healing through sharing narrative, and nothing is more powerful than connecting with other people's genealogies and experiences. And not that we're finding sameness. That's I'm not invested in that. I am invested in becoming co-strugglers, right? So that we can see, sit with, identify, hold parallel narratives that we can extrapolate and sense make. And so I really advocate the break idea. And I also, when talking to students about working with their own narratives, I want to just also offer that sometimes you do have to wait to tell the story. Sometimes that is the best way to take care and to heal. And having this talk back after your stories, as I do with my own shows, I think is integral to that process, so that people can become part of the story somehow, right? And so I just wanted to give you such gratitude for marking for us your journey and the resistance and the resilience, but also the vulnerability. And I really just honored the work that you do so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Greta and Shirley. Greta, go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to thank you for your performance. It was very like shattering, but also it was so engaging and I really enjoyed it. I had a question about, feeling out of place in academia, and kind of obviously your solution was to leave, and that is so like empowering. But for those who are still in academia or feel kind of obliged to stay in it, do you have any tips for surviving or anything like that?
I'm probably the worst person to talk to, how to, right? But I sympathize. And the thing I'm thinking about, no, you are not obliged to stay, but I do understand. This is what I was saying. I didn't learn this lesson when I was here. I think, I was over and over, I witnessed myself a pattern that I would go into institution, I would see things, I cannot put up with things, right? And then I see hypocrisy and complicity and I have to get out. And then I kept on saying to myself, my life would have been great if I just knew how to shut up. But I can't, right? I have a tough time shutting up. If I see it, I say it. Now, here's the thing, so much better now I know, is you got to pick your fight. And sometimes that means you set boundaries for yourself, and you got to be okay. For me, it's very hard for me to just stay quiet. That I can't sleep at night if I don't do something, or if I do something. That's how conscience tortures me. So if there are things I'm seeing and I don't say it, I cannot sleep. But if you take care of yourself, and sometimes it means you really pick your battle, and you need to know when to withdraw, right? And really maintain that boundaries, only fight certain battles, and sometimes just survive. And really is the thing, I would not have survived my 15 years at DePaul without having like comrades and like Valerie and Anne, and later these these are folks are so important. So definitely find your the collaborators and complicitors, not just allies. They are so vital. And another thing I know what Anne has been doing is really carve out that space where you can do your own thing. And that's kind of what I do with storytelling. I want to say this: being able to critique that resistance is not the same as being able to envision and build. Two very different things. If you always operate in opposition, your mode of operation will still be constrained within that opposition. And what you're going to do is going to end up replicating the exact oppressive structure or practices that you're trying to critique. So it is so important for me. I didn't realize that until I got out of academia, that I cannot simply envision this world in opposition, but I got to imagine a world beyond what I have experienced, right? And so I want you to think about, understand that opposition, resistance is important, but building something for yourself is very different. And I think if you think about Women's Center that Anne is building, or Women's and Gender Studies, it's essentially building that space where you can reimagine possibilities, a better way of doing things, a better way to address issues. It's not going to be perfect, right? Because no matter what, it's still within the institution. But you got to create something that can shelter you to be able to engage in practices that transcend what you are given right now. Greta, I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Shirley? And then Claire. Shirley, go ahead.
Hi, Ada.
Hi.
Hi, I just want to say, so I'm not part of the academic group. I wanted to say I'm a friend of Ada who encouraged me. Thank you so much, Ada, for encouraging me to tell my story at one of your events, which was not exactly the same, but the explanation of the Asian women, or what's also been known as yellow fever. So yeah, I had emotional reactions to everything you said. I'm not sure how I wrote this down. So I wanted to say, I will continue to tell stories, and I'm wondering about your own experience. And I think maybe you've answered it. I find it really challenging when I'm interacting with friends and I'm saying I'm going to tell these stories. And sometimes they say, oh, maybe you shouldn't be that hard hitting. You're too uptight. And this is like my own lived experience around race or racism. And then separately, they have their own way of proclaiming their support for BIPOC related trauma experiences. But there's sort of this personal space that we have where I haven't figured out how to respond to them. And I was told by some friends, respond with empathy. And there's a part of me that's like, empathy to them? And I think you answered it. It's empathy to myself first, not this other outward thing. Like they deal with their, so maybe you've answered. I just wanted to ask this question. So and maybe, again, you've answered it. How have you come across it? And I see other people shaking their heads, so thank you. But I will tell you, I'm in this program where I'm being told, show them empathy first.
Empathy for whom?
For the people who are expressing these responses, which I feel and observe objectively is dissonant from their own behavior, performative or not, whatever you want to call it. Go ahead.
I will respond. Who cares what other people think? Right. And here's the thing, over and over, when I invite community members, people who are not performers, okay, to tell stories, and surely you're one of them. and over again, it's not an issue about craft, the skill set that can come with experiences. The issue most often time people would tell me, I don't know if my stories are important enough to tell. You know why people are afraid to share personal stories? Because of shame, embarrassment, stigma, and judgment. And so I would say this to them, I cannot, you don't need my permission, and I cannot convince you that your stories are vital. And the truth is, everybody I invite or everybody I haven't invited, they have critical, important stories to share. But the truth is, I cannot convince them because they got to believe that they have a place in the world, that a voice deserves to be heard. And that's how we silence our voice in our own head, because over and over people say, I do not know if people will want to hear my story. Who cares? Because telling stories, it's about you shout out to the world, commit to a truth. And it really doesn't matter whether people are listening to you. The truth is, you deserve to be heard. You deserve to be visible. And the truth is, all the spaces that I have created, there are also witnesses there to witness story. That's how storytelling works. Someone is telling, pronouncing the truth, and there are other people witnessing. But no matter what, once you get on stage, no one else can convince you but yourself that you're worthy, that you deserve to take the time to tell your story. And that's a lot of psychological work that I usually have to work with people, but also people have to work through, that you truly got to believe. And I do wonder if we as BIPOC tellers, that we have been told so much that our voices don't matter, or our voices don't fit into the standard narrative, and our words are partial, particular, not representative enough, and therefore we silence ourselves. And so I want to encourage everybody, everyone's story is worthy, everyone deserves to be heard. And if people have any questions about that, so what? Right? You are reclaiming your truth, and your truth matters. Yes, Claire.
Thank you.
Hi there. I attended because I am a student taking a global Asian studies class right now. So we got a link to this in an email, even though global Asian studies or women's or Asian studies isn't really my concentration. I am really thankful I came. I think this arrived at really just an excellent time. And of course, I really, really commend you for sharing your story so candidly and so openly. The story you shared about the coworker of yours from Qatar especially resonated with me, both because it was just such it was really just at this intersection of, you know, being Asian, being a woman. It was so vulnerable and so important, but it also got me thinking about a question I've thought of for a while, which is, when marginalized people hurt other marginalized people, what is the way you respond to that? How do you conceive of it in your head? And most importantly, how do you react both to the person who hurt you and to other people who may not, you know right away?
Okay.
How do you react to that?
Great question. You're referring to the sexual assault piece, correct?
I am, yeah, but I do ask just a little more generally too, in addition,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I'm going to use that as an example, as a way for us to talk more generally. We suddenly rediscover violence against Asian women within the context of anti-Asian racism. Are people getting what I'm saying here? Anti-violence against Asian women have existed century long. But suddenly we have interest in violence against women. And let me ask this question. If there was no pandemic if there was no anti-Asian racism, would the two murders in New York, would they make to the news? Would the progressive people within the Asian American community talking about it? Let me ask this question. What are the names for the 6 Asian women who were murdered last year? Why is that when we talk about hate crimes, that we always refer to Vincent Chin, crimes against Asian men? So now here's the question. What's the most difficult part? These past few years, when I talk to Asian women, what's the topic that most oftentimes comes up? Misogyny and sexism of Asian men. I have called in people so much. And there's a tendency for men of color to use racism to evade their role in misogyny and sexism. I don't call out people, and I really have a tough time speaking about the harm that we do to each other, right, within the community, and then the harm that we do to each other within the marginalized communities. Because I'm always afraid to perpetuate, right, the stereotypes, right, that I have to think about how do I, is it possible that I might do harm if I speak about it? But then I also wonder, then do I silence myself? And so you raise a really good question. I still have trouble speaking about it because the truth is, I have a tough time holding people accountable within the Asian American community. When I over and over try to point out the sexism and misogyny, people do not want to acknowledge it. And that's not just conservative people. It includes progressive folks. And there's such a blind spot. And the most recent murders against Asian women is a great example. Centuries long, what if Asian women have been harmed in so many different ways? Never made it to hate crime statistics. I ask this question: should hate crime include sexual assault, intimate partner violence? Violence against women exists every day, but it has become so normalized that we don't even think about it as hate crime. And it is as if Asian women only value when it is in relation to race. But we have no value standing alone as human beings. And so that's something for us to think about. How do we address the inequity within the community? How do we talk with one another? How do we hold one another accountable? I still have difficulty. And how do we hold each other accountable across marginalized communities? Now, my thing is really about the harm that we do to each other within marginalized communities. It's no longer just white versus other marginalized communities. And so I struggle with a lot. And I don't, the only thing I can do is keep pushing it, keep asking questions, keep raising point. And Claire, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much for your answer. Yeah, it did give me a lot of important things to consider.
And I would say, I don't want people to feel silenced simply because it's issues within the communities. We can handle with subtlety, nuances, but we have to address it. Yes, Andy, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, yes, I did. I don't even know where to begin, but I'm also aware that we're running out of time. But I guess one thing is I just want to thank you for sharing your stories, and deeply, deeply felt And I maybe we could end on, I was thinking about some of the stories I've heard before. You know, you've told some of them over years in a way. And I think each time my heart breaks in different ways around it. Like I think about, also where feminists work around violence has also been silent in many ways around anti-Asian women's violence. But also just the layers. And one thing I think is so powerful about your work is that the storytelling really offers an understanding, like an analysis, like you're making us understand it in a bigger context. And I think that happened again this evening, just like giving us another lens in on it. And I wondered if you just wanted to end on kind of talking about your practice of bringing this storytelling, and I don't know if analysis is the right word, but
for those of you who are both in Leda's and Anne's class, how many of you know and you can kind of see the theorizing, the feminist theorizing I'm doing? Right? If you can kind of give me a sign right now. Did I use any jargons? No. And here's the truth. We oftentimes in academia that we feel discourse has to be conducted in such a way that is so abstract, that is so depersonalized, that is so detached from our lived experiences. We throw our jargons, right, to glamorify, right, for prestige, for status. There is prestige and capital, social and cultural capital that come with being able to manipulate and maneuver constructs, abstract construct, theorizing. But here's the truth. I oftentimes tell people I would not have been able to tell stories the way I have without that PhD. And I can do feminist theorizing without having to use any jargons. And I can challenge you to think, but really connect with you emotionally. So then why do we consistently devalue feminist practice? There's so many times that I was dragged into Dean's office because I told stories in class, and that's not a joke. That's not a joke. I got into trouble repeatedly for telling personal stories in class. And so we have to think about the discourse, the language, the theories, and the constructs that we use are a form of power. And so we cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's the tool. If we continue to think about feminist theories only in terms of theories, constructs acceptable within academia, then we are perpetuating a particular epistemic inequity, because our work is never accessible to people outside, and therefore our work always has capital value. Right? An exclusive domain is always because it's inaccessible to outside. And so there is a danger and a value and something transgressive and transformative if you're willing to use storytelling as a feminist theorizing, not just within women and gender studies, but across different disciplines. So I want people to think about possibility of talking differently, of dialoguing differently, of challenging the consistent, persistent use of theories and constructs, because it adds to our prestige and status, but really it makes us so inaccessible to people outside. And so for me, is how do I make what I do, the knowledge, the theories, accessible to everyone, so people who are not in academia can resonate, right? Can understand, can relate what I'm saying, but also understand the theories and constructs. So thank you, everybody. That's the answer. And do something.
Thank you so much, Ada. Could we all thank Ada, maybe in the chat and also through the emojis, however you want to do it. Ada, oh my God, thank you so much.
Thank you so
We're
much,
so
Ada.
blessed. We're so blessed to have you as part of our community.
We really are. And I am so glad, for one, that you don't keep your mouth shut.
Oh
I
my God.
celebrate